Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Hellhounds and black dogs. Have you encountered anything like this before? Personal Greentext. Live out in the woods in the mountains. Friend was outside on the property during a period of time, plagued by high tensions between an abusive parasitic father and parasitic partner. One day outside smoking in the backyard with them, we see a massive black dog sitting by a barn on the property. For context, this building from the ground to the lower section's roof was about 9 feet. This thing, sitting down on its hind legs with piercing red eyes, stood even with the tiling. Stare at it for what felt like forever, but was likely no more than a few seconds. Slowly walk back to the patio, keeping an eye on it. Its gaze follows, slowly flaring its teeth, but not moving an inch. Besides tracking us with its head. Get back inside. Last we ever see of it. Not the only weird thing that happened while standing by the one barn near the house looking at the other. There was something weird about that area. That back road and the forests in a sinkhole on the property. This was all during 2010 to 2015, which was a very paranormal era for the whole family. Anyone else have similar experiences? The East in America seems infamous for all sorts of strange things and creatures, especially in this time period. Red Bigfoots, translucent creatures the size of a man, or bigger, massive cave systems. Caves surrounded us in that place. I think one may have been on the property, but I never dared to brave that sinkhole. Back when flip phones were still a thing, one of us took a group photo and the entire thing was full of orbs. Not the only bizarre story either, but for added context, we went back a while after this to measure the height of the barn, and it was about 9 feet, and it was right beside it, parallel, and not a distance in front of it. We could tell from the angle we were viewing it at. Maybe bizarre things were seen around that building, and I still don't know why. 10 years later, nothing like this has happened again. I did have a completely unrelated encounter, maybe 400 yards away from this location though, in the forest. Not nearly as bone-chilling, but more bizarre in a could-have-died on a whim sense. It didn't involve whatever the hell this dog thing was. Couldn't have been a mountain lion or a wolf, unless those things exist here in sparse numbers and have been able to evade official detection. I could believe that too, possibly, but this thing had a different aura to it. Red eyes on an overcast day, about 5 p.m.
Not well recorded in the Midwest was an infestation of a sort of spiritual mind virus, somewhat unrelated to traditional hauntings that often manifested itself around abused individuals and trails down genetic lines. I think the Hindus refer to its breed as a hungry ghost. It doesn't have a name so far as I can tell, but its size sounds very similar to what you've described. Could easily be almost as tall as the roof of a semi-truck, and typically looks like a black coyote or wolf. Descriptions vary on the nature of the eyes, but the overall form remains the same. From what I've gathered, it usually clings to a dominant female and attacks the male counterpart, though waking observations are less common than nightmares. Has been noted as far as southern Illinois through Missouri and northern Arkansas. What region would you say you're in?
East Coast Appalachians. There's all sorts of things around here. Every variant of abomination thanks to the vast forests, mountains, and cave systems. Often manifested itself around abused individuals and trails down genetic lines. Sounds about right. In this same time period, someone who was at my property in the same location. The dog beast was spotted, said he felt something grasp his shoulder, and whispered telepathically into his head, "Not you," and instinctively knew it was the parasitic father that he was acquainted with. Guy was like a vacuum that simultaneously emitted the most dreadful negative energy. Male BPD energy. Narcissistic and weaponized his weakness. All sorts of things from that period seemed to seek him out, and the happenings vanished when he left the neighborhood.
Black dogs appear when someone is fated to die soon, and they shepherd them to the afterlife, or drag them forcefully if they were evil.
Weird. No one died when it was spotted. I'm still surprised to this day that one asshole is still alive.
Aren't there black hounds of the devil from English and Scottish and Welsh folklore? Maybe they followed the Anglos to the New World?
I think there are many examples of all kinds of things all over the world. We have rock apes here too. But these hellhound sightings give me a particular feeling. It's almost like they're not physical, at least entirely. And I know there's the rumor that Sasquatch are interdimensional too, because of the accounts from the Appalachians, of them kidnapping children and using telepathy to communicate. These dogs almost look like smoke, though.
I remember when I was very young growing up in Suki, Vancouver Island. I used to play alone in our 2 acres of woodland. I always knew there was something with me. I familiarized it with a dog, but it was not until much later that I found it was more than just a figment of my imagination or some invisible friend that children tend to materialize. I was about 12 years old living in Powell River, British Columbia, the first time I saw it. Me and my best friend were walking around the trailer park she lived in, situated beside the woods. It was late, about 11 at night, and we were excited her mom let us take a walk by ourselves. As we rounded a corner, we noticed that there was a gathering of a few of the local cats all making quite a fuss as we approached the next corner where they were. We turned to look in the direction they were facing. About 4 lots away was an empty one on the corner. Sitting right beneath the streetlight was a huge black dog. We both didn't really believe our eyes, so we kept walking. My eyes were transfixed. I just wanted to get closer. It did not fade away until very suddenly as we approached about 4 meters to it. We both had no idea what it was, but were very intrigued. I haven't heard any stories from her of it since. But I have a different story. Ever since then, I've seen him periodically. Being a small town, I felt quite safe walking home alone or taking strolls in the moonlight. Often I would catch him out of the corner of my eye, or I would sit and stare at him for some time before he vanished. I didn't think too much of him. I always enjoyed his presence. When I read up on the infamous black dogs, I heard much about bad things, so I was never really sure what he was. As I researched, I got many different names like Black Shuck and the one Padfoot that really stuck. Unfortunately, after that Harry Potter movie, you'll never find information by researching that name again. When I was about 16 was when I was sure he was more of a guardian. My boyfriend at the time seldom walked me home. He would make up excuses why not to, and as I didn't really feel there was much danger, I would usually take the alleys to avoid main streets housing drunken boys or cops wondering why you were out past dark. I'll admit the pitch-black alleys were creepy, but what was I afraid of? Well, after a few months of walking home alone, one evening I realized I wasn't alone. I could feel someone walking beside me, a dog. I have a real dog of my own at home, and it was the exact same feeling. Slightest brush up against my leg, the soft breathing. Often I'd even hear the click of his nails on the tarmac. But he would only stay through the portion of the walk that was completely black. When the streetlights appeared and the alley ended, I'd turn and see a shadow disappearing back into it. I began to enjoy the company, but was very alarmed one time when my boyfriend called, right after he had walked me home, one of the few and far between occasions in distress. He said after he'd said goodbye to me and turned back into the alley, he felt something following him. He walked faster and it sped up. He got an overwhelming bad feeling and began to run, and it started to make these awful howling noises that were completely otherworldly. He was so scared he didn't know what to think. He said as he ran out of the alley and turned to see what was there, he just saw a shadow disappear back into it. Honestly, all I could do was laugh and tell him that was who had been walking me home safe all these months, and it was angry with him. That was just my speculation, but it truly sounds like it may be the case. I now live and work in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I have seen this Padfoot a couple times. Often in alleys, like the one my door faces. I will sit outside by myself for a cigarette, and if I feel uneasy, I will ask if he's around. Sometimes I can make out the clear shadow of him in the garden or in front of the hedges in the alley. One occasion I hadn't seen him in some time. It was during the day. I had been talking to him a bit. Sounds crazy, but sometimes I think maybe if he's really watching over me, he might be listening. I went about my usual house chores, and as I walked into the bathroom, the most pungent aroma of wet dog I've ever smelled filled the room. I felt almost paralyzed. The closest dog to the house I rent is across the street. Our landlady doesn't allow animals. So I was just left smiling and thinking he must be listening.
I happened to speak to a friend today, and for some reason we came to the topic of spooky stories from our life. It happened quite a long time ago, and I haven't remembered it for a while. Not that I had completely forgotten, it's just one of these experiences that get locked up in the depths of your mind. There are actually 3 distinctive accounts when I saw a ghostly dog. The first one was in primary school in the hotel on a school trip. It was in the afternoon, 2 or 3 p.m., and we were just returning from a walk in the city. We took the elevator, so on walking towards our rooms, we passed by the stairs. I'm pretty sure they were on our right. When I looked in their direction, I saw the shape of a huge black dog going up, disappearing just around the corner. I thought it was a guest's dog, and since it seemed pretty odd, we were in a hotel after all. I told my friend, and both of us dashed upstairs to see whether there really was a dog. I don't know whether he saw it or not, but we went 3 floors up and reached the top, and still we saw nothing. The top was like a ceiling, dark, and had no hotel rooms or guests. The next day, at noon again, I went back there, this time alone, and I swear I saw the shape of the dog running down the hall. I got pretty scared and ran downstairs. I went to my teacher and told her about it, but of course she didn't believe me. I told a few classmates later on, and we went looking for it again and saw nothing, but still ran down the stairs screaming, because somebody decided it would be fun to yell out and run away. Kid stuff. Of course, because of that little story, I was forced to write 100 times. I will not scare my classmates, and I will not talk about imaginary things or something like that. I was pretty sure I really saw something, though, still later on dismissed it as a play of light and shadows. However, a few years later, I had an even more realistic experience. Until today, I'm not really certain whether I really saw something or I was in a weird state of falling asleep. Even though sleeping seems unlikely to me since I was watching TV, and I have never in my life fallen asleep in front of the TV. It was the afternoon around 4 or 5 p.m., and it had already begun to get dark since it was the late autumn. I was lying on my dad's bed watching a program I used to watch every afternoon. It was around 30 minutes long. The intro had just ended when I heard something like a growl coming from the direction towards which my head was pointing. The door of the room was there. Naturally, I thought it was the fridge since it was just a few steps down the hall and used to let out a loud growling sound when kicking on. Still, it sounded somehow different, so I slightly looked up, catching the shadow of a big dog just in front of the fridge. Instantly, my eyes darted forward and remained locked on the ceiling. I was laying on my back. The sounds of the TV remained in the background almost unnoticeable, and all my senses fixed on the growl. I heard it once more, and then everything went grave silent apart from the vague sound of light steps. I had frozen in my spot, unable to move, and even my heart had slowed its beating. I thought I could almost hear the breath of what looked like a huge black dog made of barely transparent shadows. It was still pretty bright, so it couldn't have been a trick of darkness, and the window was pointing eastward, so it wasn't a trick of light either. It seemed like time had slowed or even stopped together with my thoughts. I kept watching it from the corner of my eye as it slowly moved and stopped for a moment, looking towards that window towards which my feet were pointing. Next thing I know, it twisted its neck, and looking at me, jumped onto the bed. I could barely feel any weight when its paws stopped at my chest, but I could feel a heavy presence. I stared into its eyes, which I can't really tell the color of. They weren't red or orange, as it is said in most legends, maybe a pale yellow or just gray, I don't remember. The whole thing was a blob of dark matter and not at all that transparent as in the previous account I mentioned. It seemed almost flesh and blood, but it tended to shimmer and become slightly transparent from time to time. It growled quietly once more and twisting its neck turned and leaped, disappearing through the window. The window was closed at the time, too. I remained frozen for a while, and I don't really know how much time had passed in total, but by the time I became aware of the TV again, the show I was watching had long finished and some other thing was running. Like I said, I don't really know whether it was some sort of sleep state or reality or imagination or whatever. But one thing I know for sure, despite me being foolishly fearless about pretty much everything. I mean, I laugh in the face of danger and tell scary stories as a pastime since I remember myself. Just remembering this story makes me freeze in my spot and fear my own shadow. I swear I can even hear the growl behind me again if I keep thinking about it. I know that is a trick of my freaked out mind, but it's still quite spooky. Even the chime bell I have on my balcony is freaking me out. That's how scared this makes me. That was not the last account I saw, though. A few years later, in the late afternoon of the spring or late winter, I was walking down the stairs of my building, and at the very bottom I saw the very vague, very transparent shape of a dog. I think it seemed kind of different, but I can't really say since it was too vague. I stared at it for a second, and I think it twisted its head to stare back at me. But right away I ran up the stairs. I kept seeing a shadow of a dog or hearing barking and growling despite none of the neighbors having a dog. But I think that was more due to my new fear. I don't remember when I stopped seeing or hearing it. I think it was after I subconsciously blocked it, since I got scared out of my mind every time I had to go home when it was getting dark. And ever since we moved from that place, I think I haven't seen or heard anything of the sort. Also, when I was little, I used to see quite a lot of ghostly things, but I think it was due to my overactive imagination. Still, the dog thing was way too real, and I didn't see it just once. So yeah, I don't really know what to make of my visions, whether to count them as having a grain of truth or simply imagination. I'm not superstitious at all, just to say, but I do believe there is something supernatural around in some places. And I was just curious to know if someone knew more on the topic or had similar experiences, or knew more about the symbolism of a black dog, other than the devil or death, I mean. I'm pretty alive still, and thankful I don't have any tragic deaths around me. I also considered it being my grandpa's old dog, which was killed when I was 7, but it was not that huge and was white with light brown spots and long fur. The one I saw looked more like a huge Doberman with a wolf head and short fur. I don't really know why I am so scared remembering either. I have no logical reason. It's just something I can't control. God, it sounds like a really stupid story now that I read it. I apologize for my messy writing too. It's kind of hard to order my thoughts. I haven't really shared it with anybody either after the teacher scolded me and my friend mocked me. Anyways, thank you for reading.
Around 3 a.m. on July 14, 2020, I had my first close cryptid sighting. I'm a waste hauler, Trashman. I start my days very early every day, so the majority of my workday takes place in the wee hours of the day. I live in South Central Pennsylvania and have resided there nearly my whole life. My place of employment is in the college town of Shippensburg. My job sits in the outlying area of Shippensburg. A lot of these areas are surrounded by vast farmlands and open fields. Well, this morning, while traveling to the start of my route, I turned down one of the many roads surrounded by fields. It was a half-crescent moon, so there was plenty of light to see in the darkness. As I rounded my turn, I saw what looked like a cow lying in an open field. But this field had no fences or wire to keep livestock in. And it was only one. I found this very odd as I'm looking at the broad shoulders of what I thought was a cow, so I broke out my high-power mag light to brighten up what I was looking at. When my beam hit this animal, it rose up from the ground in a slow, lumbering, and purposeful action. As it came up on all fours, the creature stood about 5 to 6 feet tall at its shoulder blades. I'm my truck. I'm elevated, and I sit about that high from the ground. The creature was about 30 feet from me, and I know if I stood toe-to-toe with it, its head would be taller than I, and I'm 6 foot. Now at this moment, the back of this creature is still facing me. It then turned its head into my light, and the lens flared off its eyes were a yellow-green color, and eyes facing forward. This was a predatory creature, not a damn cow. At that moment, heat and cold wash over my body, and I feel real, genuine, life-threatening fear take over. I don't move. Sitting in the middle of the road, knowing I'm low on the pecking order of the food chain at this moment, it continues to measure me for what felt forever, and it suddenly turned its head and tore off faster than I could know. My pathetic guess is about 30 to 40 miles per hour as it darted away, and after all this, the only thing I could think was that it was some form of giant hyena, the most terrifying real-life creature I've ever witnessed, and it was gone so fast. I hope there are others that may have seen or heard of what I saw, that light can be shed on the topic, especially for my area. I work in that darkness all the time. Now I'm looking over my shoulder.
It was around 11:15 p.m. on a mid-November evening in 2007. I was getting into bed when my mobile phone started ringing. It was a friend. I had to get some important papers too for the next morning. I had totally forgotten so quickly I jumped out of bed, got dressed, and told my wife I'd be back in an hour or so. After dropping off the documents, I made my way back, and to my surprise, all the lights were on in the bungalow. I started worrying and hastened to get inside because it just didn't seem right. Once inside, I saw my wife sitting in the living room with my 5-year-old still asleep next to her on the sofa. My wife was looking a little pale, and I asked her if she was okay and queried why all the lights were on. She began telling me that straight after I left, she turned the light off to go to sleep. She continued that after around 5 minutes or so, she heard the bedroom door creak and slowly open, and then she felt the whole room go very cold. She initially thought that it was a draft, but then she felt something jump on the bed and start growling like a dog. She said that she couldn't move and that this thing was trying to get at my daughter who slept next to her. She tried to scream and could feel the duvet being pulled down. She began to utter a prayer, and this thing began growling very loud, and then she felt it leap off the bed and run off out of the room. She then got off the bed and turned the light on. After a few minutes, she said that she picked my daughter up and she turned on every light in the house. Naturally, I was kind of freaked out at what she was telling me, and I tried to shrug it off as perhaps some kind of nightmare or night terror, but she was adamant that it felt too real to be a bad dream. Deep down inside, I was a bit apprehensive as certain other strange things had occurred since we moved into an unused room due to some damp problems in our former bedroom across the hallway. Loud banging noises like something heavy had fallen from a height would occur at times from this bedroom, but whenever I checked, everything was normal. Me and my wife would also have bad nightmares of big black dogs, snakes, and an evil old man whose face we could never see, but would feel a great sense of evil from him. I also once heard a voice say, "I'm really pissed off now," in my left ear whilst lying down in bed in a very creepy voice with an English accent. A month or so later, my wife had to go abroad to Pakistan as her sister was getting married. I couldn't go with her as I had business to attend to, and my daughter would stay with my parents for the 3 weeks that she was going. Anyway, the first night after she left, I tucked up into bed. The time was around 12:45 a.m. and I was very tired. I was slowly falling asleep when all of a sudden I heard the door start creaking, and then the door just swung open as if pushed hard from outside, and then I felt something heavy jump onto my bed and bite at my duvet. This thing began growling and pulling the duvet even harder when all of a sudden I jumped out of my bed and shouted, "What the hell do you want?" I was livid and angry and wanted to hurt this thing, but there was nothing there. I looked towards the door and it was moving slowly and shut itself. I ran to the light and switched it on. I then sat there for 5 minutes, my heart racing, and then it dawned on me about the incident with my wife. The hairs on my body stood up and I began to recite some prayers. I then went to my sitting room and turned the TV on. I just sat there contemplating what had just happened, and I knew it wasn't a dream. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't happy and didn't want me and my family in that room. There were also many numerous times I would see shadows bolting around from my peripheral vision, mostly dark shadows, but some white ones too. Me and my family have since moved from that property and haven't had any similar incidents in our new place, but every now and again, I sense that someone is watching me.
I'm pretty sure I had one of those black shuck encounters. This'll take a few posts. Don't care if anyone reads it, I just want to post it. 2010. Go to at the time GF's house. Don't head there until about 8 p.m. Quickest way is along the Strip. It's just a street a half-mile long with pubs and clubs on it. Always full of people from out of the area causing trouble. Prefer to avoid this route. Other solution is right behind the Strip are these woods. You don't need to go through them, just alone a dirt path at the top that runs right behind the Strip. Starts about 50 yards before it and ends about 50 yards after it. There's a 10-foot wall on one side that separates it and the woods on the other. Path is really narrow and obviously dark. Hung around these woods for years, so I'm not really bothered about going that way. Get part of the way along and sense someone is behind me. Turn around and see this massive black dog a few yards behind. At first I thought it's a fox because it has this really soft-looking, nice fur. But it's really big like a wolf, except we don't have wolves here. Ergo, it must be a dog. Look around for its owner. No one there. For reasons I can't fully explain, I try to be a Chad and stamp my foot to scare it away. Sits down and looks at me like I'm dumb. Don't want to risk going past it, so I continue the way I'm headed, only walking backwards, just sit there. Once there's a safe gap between us, I turn my back to it. Glance over my shoulder and it's following me again. Repeat this charade of walking backwards. It's sitting down, me turning back around, me glancing over my shoulder until I finally reach the exit. Can't tell you how relieved I am that I'm back to civvy life. Cross the road and look back at the exit. Dog doesn't leave but stands there watching me walk off. Tell GF about it. Tells me it was just a dog and the dark made me think it was bigger than it was. Leave her house a little after 1 a.m. Strip closes at 1 a.m. and she lives about 10 minutes from it. Knowing everywhere is closed, I have no need to walk a spooky path back home. In fact, I'm not even walking on that side of the road. Walk along the strip. 3 idiots across the street. See me and start storming over looking to cause trouble, shouting things, you know the type. Get to the middle of the road, turn on their heels and literally fall over running away. Heh, yeah, they know I'm a badass. Bit windy and adrenaline is up, so I pop my head in this doorway I'm next to light a cigarette. Look down. Massive black dog sitting right there looking at me. Get startled. Walk away from it quickly. Keep glancing over my shoulder and it's following behind. Finish my cigarette, look behind me, it's gone. Exit strip. Glance over at the spook path and woods entrance. Black dog comes padding up to it, sits down and looks over. Crouch down and sort of mire it. Starts growling at me and baring its teeth. Yeah, screw this, I'm out of here. Semi-follow on. Tell my friend about it. Insists we go to the woods that night looking for it. Reluctant, but do agree. Sitting on a spooky path for about half an hour. See nothing. From seemingly nowhere, this massive dog appears out of the bushes. The only difference is this one isn't the blackest black I've ever seen. It's the whitest white I've ever seen. Looks amazing. Turns around and runs off into the woods. Friend runs after it to try and get a pic. When he comes back, he says it just vanished. Went there years and never saw either of them before or since. Funny thing is, we don't even have black shuck stories where I live. They're all hundreds of miles away, so I have no idea what was going on. It saved my bacon that night, though I know that.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.